Hello everyone, Mani Napudni, Nainari Reb. Welcome, it's good you all came. My name is Reb. So, Mani Nadlu Tampinthi, Nadlu Ghana, Yatanga Imparinthi. It's good we acknowledge that we're meeting on Ghana land. So, we're here with, we're all here with Sarah. So, this is a bit of a rundown with a bit of an agenda for today. We have this is the 10th and final instalment of our seminar series for 2024, which we're running to help share the great work happening to make Adelaide a cooler, greener, wilder place and much more climate resilient. And this session is being recorded, so it will be available on the Green Adelaide YouTube channel after this session. So for this session, we've got a presentation for about 40 minutes with Sarah. And then we will follow up with any questions that you might have. We have a Q&A function with our teams and this online meeting, so please pop any questions you may have into that Q&A function. We'll follow them up at the end. Really, that's it in terms of my housekeeping. I am going to stop sharing my screen here.
I'll take over.
1 second, and then Sarah's going to start sharing her screen. So while that all happens, it does give me great pleasure to welcome with us today, Sarah White. So Sarah is the Regional Data Officer at Green Adelaide and Project Manager for the Urban Heat and Tree Canopy Mapping Project. She is going to give us an in-depth exploration of urban heat in Adelaide. Urban heat is an issue which particularly impacts Adelaide and can disproportionately affect the most vulnerable people in our communities. Green Adelaide has been undertaking exciting work to make spatial mapping data available so that we can create actions that are targeted and perhaps even link in with our Green Adelaide urban greening strategy. So without further ado, I am going to pass over to Sarah. And Sarah, would you like me to keep an eye on time? Would you like to do that?
Yeah, maybe if I start going on a bit too late, maybe cut me off so we've got time for questions. Yeah, that'd be a good idea.
All good.
Cool, thanks Reb, and thanks Nat for organising everything. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining me today. So yeah, just a quick rundown here of what we'll be talking about today. So first off, introducing you to the urban heat island effect, if that's not something that you're familiar with, and just how it is impacting Adelaide and its climate. How Adelaide's environment has been monitored over probably the last 6 years, but using remote sensing tools and methods. And then the project I've been mostly involved with, the Urban Heat Tree Canopy Mapping Project that Green Adelaide was leading since 2021, since I started. What that data reveals about Adelaide's urban environment and how that impacts people in social disadvantage. And then how is that data being used? How are state and local governments using that data to help? And how to access that data yourself. It's all available online, so we'll go through that and how you can access it to help maybe direct your own work, and then hopefully have some time for questions at the end. So before I get going, just really wanted to acknowledge all the partners that we've had in this project. It's Green Adelaide has taken a leading role in this project, but we've also worked very closely with our council and state government agency partners. And without their expertise and experience in this space, we probably wouldn't have gotten very far, but they've been very valuable to this whole process. So to start out, the real grim message, unfortunately, the negative side of this, why urban heat matters in Adelaide. Heat waves was a big surprise to me, this statement that heat waves have contributed more to excess mortality in Australia than any other natural hazard combined. So the health impacts of heat are being felt across Australia. And we can see here that climate change is making that worse. So since I think the 50s, Adelaide in particular has experienced hotter heat waves and longer heat waves, and that's only going to get worse. And we can see that trend is going up. And South Australia being I think I was told that South Australia was a Mediterranean climate and we're transitioning to an arid zone climate. So we're particularly vulnerable to that, those impacts. So the urban heat island effect is an effect that has been observed in large cities across the world, where high proportions of impermeable hard surfaces, artificial surfaces like roads, buildings, car parks, playgrounds, all those sort of things, they absorb heat during the day and they radiate that heat back into the environment during the day, so exacerbating that heat effect during the day, but they also radiate that heat out into the environment well after dark. So that's when it's compared to rural areas close by. So areas that have a bit of vegetation, you either get the cooling effect or transpiration effect from that vegetation. So it's really that impact of those hard impermeable surfaces. And yeah, that's an observable effect that's happening in cities around the world. So it has a lot of impacts on people living in cities. So it impacts through just making heat waves that much worse. You probably imagine just walking down the street on a hot day, just that reflected radiated heat off buildings, off the pavement, off the road. It really increases that impact as you're commuting to work. And yeah, it also increases things like energy consumption, where you're forced to use your air conditioning or increasing using your car because you don't want to walk on a hot day, and just reduces that ability to get outside. And then have the extra impact of extra, it's sort of a feedback loop. You have that extra pollutants, extra gases, and there's those impacts on people being able to live their lives and impacting on health. When you think that you've got that heat effect radiating back out into the environment well after dark, you're not able to sleep, you're forced to use your air conditioner, you're not able to exercise. It's going to impact health as well. So unfortunately, these impacts are not distributed equally. They're already being impacted on the most vulnerable people in communities, either through exposure at work. They might be doing manual work outside, or people who are living in poorly constructed housing who don't have good insulation, don't have good air conditioning. The cost of air conditioning, the cost of electricity, they might not be able to afford solar panels to run their air conditioning. And it's disproportionately affecting people who are living with long-term chronic illness and long-term mental health issues. There's some really horrible stories from heat waves overseas that disproportionately people who have got long-term mental health or chronic health issues, they're the ones who are dying or getting sick because they're usually living alone in poor housing, in dense housing, and they can't afford to pay for air conditioning. So you really start to see those horrible impacts that are disproportionately impacting those social groups. So a great way to visualize the urban heat effect at a smaller scale, as I said, it's sort of that impact of hard surfaces radiating out heat from a hot day. So you get that immediate impact. But then also why trees and vegetation are important to help as a mitigation effect to that is that direct shading through bigger trees. You think direct shading, you probably experience at least a 5 to 10 degree drop in temperature. And then when you add in actively growing vegetation transpires. So as it's breathing out water. So you're getting that evapotranspiration effect. But as we probably all know, I'm probably preaching to the choir, we all know that trees and vegetation and healthy vegetation are important to so many different aspects of healthy life, through social connection, just those benefits through ecosystem health and connection to country, ecosystem services. We all know it's not just about the heat, shading from the heat and the transpiration. It's all those other health benefits that we get from having healthy vegetation around us. So yeah, moving on, how do we monitor Adelaide's environment and that to help us achieve cooler, greener, wilder, climate resilient Adelaide? So as I mentioned, this project wouldn't have been possible without the help of council partners, and a lot of that is because between 2016 and 2019, various partnerships of councils ran quite a few different projects, scaling up from a single council, Mitcham Council, doing LiDAR work and asking that question, can we monitor our tree canopy using LiDAR? And also on Kapringa doing thermal imagery capture, and the different partnerships of councils working together to put those data sets together to say, can we look at these patterns of urban heat and how it's impacted by distribution of tree canopy? And when that was all put together, all the councils partnered with state government, DEW, to put all that data together as one big data set to look at patterns of urban heat, tree canopy, and permeable and impermeable surfaces. So that's been available as a viewer, online mapping viewer, since 2021. And then when Green Adelaide started, there was it was understood and recognised that it was a really good opportunity to expand and complete that whole capture across the entire Metro Adelaide region in one project. So we're capturing the same conditions all at the same time. And that was a really great opportunity for Green Adelaide to take that leadership and work with that knowledge and expertise from councils and DEW to apply it to the entire region. So which brings us to the data capture that we led. So as I said, the idea was to build on what councils did between 2016, 2019 to replicate where possible their methodology, with the hope that we could then be able to monitor change. We could actually compare the two data sets and form a single baseline, so for future monitoring of Adelaide's urban tree canopy and urban heat. And then the real power of this, I think, is that it's a contiguous data set. It's the first time a data set like this was captured for the entire Metro Adelaide region at one time. So it's a single point of truth that is standardised across the entire metro area that everyone can access and use, and we know that we're working from that shared point of truth. So when we talk about the data that we captured, this is a quick rundown of the data that we captured. So we have a tree canopy height model, which is a three-dimensional tree canopy spatial layer that basically describes the height and the horizontal extents of tree canopy. And then using that, we can look at, so tree height, tree cover extents. So that's where we calculate the percentage tree cover. That's where that comes from. The permeable, impermeable surfaces, I'll go into a bit more detail about that later, about just defining where those hard surfaces are and where the permeable surfaces are. So areas where water can penetrate the ground. We can look at what's called the normalised difference vegetation index. So that's a method of looking at where vegetation is healthy and growing, and as opposed to areas where it's not growing or bare earth or artificial surfaces. And of course, we've got the thermal imagery. So with that, we can look at small scale patterns in thermal spatial extent, right up to the large urban heat islands where it's large scale patterns in urban heat. So many people ask, what is LiDAR? This is what we use to map our urban tree canopy. So LiDAR stands for light detection and ranging. So I usually describe LiDAR as, imagine there's a little plane in the sky and it's got this device underneath it that's basically using laser beams to scan the Earth's surface. So it's very accurate. It's sending out up to about 20 points per square metre. So it sends that point out and it bounces off whatever's on the ground, and it returns that to the sensor, and it basically calculates the amount of time it takes for that laser to leave the plane, bounce off the ground, come back. And it gives us this really detailed 3D point cloud of whatever's on the ground. So trees, building, surface of the earth, cars, all sorts of things get picked up with LiDAR. So it's very accurate 3D point cloud. So as part of this capture, we also captured aerial imagery. So that's very high resolution imagery. So this is a really good reference point. So say we can look at something in one of the other data sets and then have a look at the imagery to see what's going on. So that's been really handy as well. So as I mentioned, multispectral imagery. So this is your visible light, red, green, blue light, plus the near infrared. And it's that near infrared that allows us to do the NDVI calculation, because when vegetation is healthy, it has a different wavelength that it's absorbing infrared light compared to dead or dying vegetation. So you can work out the difference between those, and you can actually identify, as we see in this false color image, where there's healthy growing vegetation and where there's either bare earth or artificial surfaces. So this is a really good indicator of where we've got healthy growing vegetation. So our thermal imagery, so that was captured from a thermal imagery camera. It's mounted on a plane, 2-meter resolution. So it's been really great to be able to use this to look at different surface types. So here you can see basically ranging from red, the warmer areas, to cool, in blue. So of course the river is cooler during the day, and the big red patches, that'd be either roads, dark surfaces, or bare earth. They tend to heat up a lot during the day as well. So as I mentioned, our tree canopy data, so we have this 3D tree canopy model. So I probably should mention that for the purpose of this, any tree over 3 meters was what was classed as a tree, because that's where we start thinking that a tree's providing shade as well as that evapotranspiration type benefit. So when we look at this is only trees above 3 meters. And it ranges from those pale colours, that's really tall trees, down to the shorter trees. They're blue. So you can really see a lot of those street trees are barely above 3 meters, whereas those big red gums along the torrens are taller. And yeah, using a mix of the LiDAR and the multispectral imagery, we can combine those data sets to provide a data set like this, where it describes permeable and impermeable surfaces, as well as building footprints and bodies of water. So it can really start seeing those patterns of where there's hard surfaces, where there's large proportions of hard surfaces as opposed to large proportions of permeable, so dirt, anywhere that allows water to penetrate the soil. So they're the data sets that we captured. So the next step was, what does that tell us? What sort of results did we get? So the one that most people are most interested in is canopy cover. As I mentioned, we could calculate percentage canopy cover, and we could start seeing patterns across Adelaide, Metro Adelaide, where there was high and low canopy. And it was, as probably would be no surprise to most people, it's not evenly distributed. So yeah, 74% of our suburbs have less than 20% canopy cover. There are a lot of things at play here. It's not just about where there's planted trees, it's also about the local environment. You think Adelaide Plains before colonisation was partially grasslands with some trees. It was very much curated by Kaurna people who lived in the area. But with natural environment, you're not going to get much canopy along the coastline naturally. You're more likely to get the bigger trees up in the foothills where there's more rain, deeper soil, that sort of stuff. So there's a range of physical reasons for the distribution changes, as well as land management regions, so areas that were cleared for agriculture, industry, all that sort of stuff. So you're dealing with a lot of historical land management and physical reasons for this wide range of distribution. But yeah, so it ranges from 1.7% tree canopy cover in Seaford Heights, which is quite a recent housing development area, and the maximum is probably no surprise up in the hills in Waterfall Gully. And then looking at the tree canopy cover at a finer grain detail, we've got a layer like this that looks at tree canopy cover over a 100 metre by 100 metre grid. So you get those finer detail patterns of where tree canopy is. And you can really start seeing details like where the river corridors are, where there's remnant vegetation along those river corridors, and see areas where there's less trees along major road corridors as well. So this is just a different way of looking at the data. And yeah, end up with that key statistic that 47% of Adelaide Metro has less than 10% tree canopy. And then when we, as I said, we've got a 3D canopy cover model, so we can look at height as well. So we can see that most of the trees in Adelaide are less than 10 metres tall, which isn't surprising that most of them would be street trees that are being managed for urban environment. So very few of our trees are over 20 metres tall, so big mature trees. And as this picture shows, you can see a lot of them are existing along river corridors or up in the hills. And just an overall view of permeable and impermeable surfaces. Yeah, it really shows that macro view of a lot of Adelaide is there's a lot of rural areas. So there's that rural core dense urban area on the plains, but there's still quite a lot of permeable surfaces and a little bit of water. And as I mentioned, one of the real opportunities with that thermal imagery being 2 metre by 2 metre grid, we can start looking at different surface types and how that affects local urban heat. So yeah, you can see the impact of trees. So how much those trees, those blue blobs on the left-hand side of the screen, they're trees, they're cooling down their local area. And you can see how much that's cooled their local neighbourhood, as opposed to the middle one and the right-hand side one, that you get that denser housing, less street trees, less private land trees, and it's hotter and hotter as there's less vegetation. And I thought this was a great one to show because it just shows you that impact of different surface types, different roof colour types. So you've got that little bit at the top with white coloured roofs and the big blobs of red where there's all dark coloured roofs. And I read somewhere it was someone's tried to quantify how much that costs per year. I think they said it's an extra $900 a year to cool your house with a dark roof, as long as you're not in Tasmania. That's the only place it's actually beneficial to have a dark roof. But yeah, we've got the evidence there that dark coloured roofs are hotter. But when we bring all the data together, we can start looking at areas where people are already impacted by urban heat. So this is, as I mentioned, we did an urban heat island. So where there's higher intensity urban heat islands. So it's a 125 metre grid where it displays areas that are at least 2 metres hotter than the average for the overall area. So I've got an example here of the western suburbs in the heat islands in the western suburbs. And when you bring it all together, you can see, probably not surprising, that areas that have a low tree canopy and a high percentage of impermeable surface are the areas where you're seeing heat islands. So I don't think there's any surprises there that I think anyone who lives in those areas that there's not many trees, a lot of hard surfaces, and it does get quite hot. So as I mentioned, one of the opportunities with trying to replicate the methodology that councils did in the last tree canopy capture was that we can start monitoring change. We can look at change in our urban environment, look at where, unfortunately, the trees are being lost. So this is probably a clear example of where a lot of trees have been cleared for a housing development, and it's just, yeah, been wiped clear. So all those red splotches in that right-hand side image, they were all trees that were there in 2018 but weren't there in 2022. So even though overall our data says that our tree canopy has increased for that area that was captured twice, we're still losing a lot of trees. Yeah, just in residential land alone, we lost 6 million square metres of trees. So yeah, it's not to say that it's all rosy. But we can see areas where tree canopy is increasing, one thing we've found is in housing developments that had been brand new in the last capture, where there'd been a lot of street tree planting and reserve planting, particularly by councils and by state government along road reserves. Those trees are now getting to that 3 metre threshold. So they're starting to get captured as trees, or they're just really starting to grow out and mature. So that's where we're seeing our increases in trees. Mostly is just those reserve and those street trees. And you can just see them there, those little green splodges of tree growth. But again, bringing all the data together, we can see what does this mean on the ground in terms of urban heat. So you can see what was there in 2018, the housing development and loss of trees that has happened since then, and then the subsequent urban heat. So you can see those areas where there might have been trees before, and those areas are now quite warm. And you can see where the trees have been left in the ground, it's quite a bit cooler. So yeah, with all this information, what is state and local government doing about it? So councils just have been working really hard using this data since that initial data captures. So it's really directed a lot of investment on cool surfaces, on irrigating parks, just recognising that benefit of irrigated grass and vegetation to cool their local areas, and creating cooler surfaces that either don't radiate so much heat or they're permeable surfaces, so they're allowing water to be absorbed. And also, banning fake grass. That's an artificial surface that causes a lot of localised heat. And the data sets have been a core component of directing Green Adelaide's urban greening strategy. So it's been provided evidence to direct some of the decisions and guided the building of this strategy for Green Adelaide, for the Adelaide metropolitan area, and working towards creating a cooler, leafier, more biodiverse city. And it's going to be used in the future as a performance measure, so we can actually start monitoring targets that will be set under that strategy. So yeah, it's providing that evidence and why we need urban greening and why it's important for all levels of government to work towards urban greening with increasing infill development, just to have that evidence to support why we need to have good design and why we need to retain existing trees, and why it's important to build nature into your everyday life. That it's not just about the trees, it's about having access to parks, having that equitable access to green spaces. And then just how do you actually manage those trees, and starting to build a mechanism so that government can work together with non-government partners and local government partners to work together to fix some of these problems and start from that good evidence base. So yeah, that's you've got the urban greening strategy, and we've got those evidence bases. So having that urban heat, the tree canopy data, also the biodiversity side of things as well, building in biodiversity into that greening. It's not just about the greening and putting in jacarandas and introduced plants everywhere. It's about building back in biodiversity to encourage wildlife back into our lives. So there's a lot of evidence has gone into this strategy, and then we'll be going forward with an implementation plan, I think, next year. And one of the guiding data sets that will be helping with that strategy is this greening prioritisation analysis. So this was a pilot analysis that was run on those initial data sets from Council back in 2021. So it brought in all these variables from that original capture. So tree canopy cover, green cover, where all the impermeable surfaces were, combine that with urban heat and then measures of social vulnerability to build those components. So we've got environmental, thermal and social vulnerability components to end up with this end result, which is greening prioritisation surfaces. So with a bit of a traffic light colour scheme, that high priority areas are marked red. So they're areas with high levels of impermeability, high levels of social vulnerability, high levels of urban heat, and low levels of tree canopy and permeability. So again, I don't think there's any real surprises that these are the areas that would come out as high priority for urban greening in the future. So it was run at two different scales. So we've got the suburb scale, the coarse scale, so you can see you can prioritise suburb level, but then you can also drill into a 50 by 50 metre grid to look at that finer grain detail. So we've got some great examples here where even where suburbs, say like Adelaide City as a suburb is low priority, but there are high priority areas at that finer grain detail. And it can really help, we're hoping this will really help in the future direct urban greening and direct targeted investments, either through grants or through water sensitive urban design or biodiversity sensitive urban design, or infrastructure grants or education programs. That's the hope, that we're going to be rerunning this in very early in the new year. So that will be shared and will hopefully help direct investment where it's most needed. And of course, you can explore all this data yourself. So we have an urban heat tree mapping viewer. So I think we'll share the link in the chat. I think Nat was going to do that for me, or Reb. So this is all available for you to view online. We have on there just all the reports that came with the data as well. So you can have a look at a bit of the technical side of things, and also a few little tips of understanding the data with the FAQs. So yeah, you can explore the data for yourself. I've personally found it's a great visualization tool that people like to zoom in on their house or their school or their office or where they go to get to work or something like that. And it's great just to see how much your local trees are cooling your backyard, or how warm or cool your house is. So just a few quick examples of sort of thing you can see on there. Yeah, you can zoom in to anywhere you like, and you can see the tree canopy. So the taller tree canopy in yellow, the smaller ones in blue. And yeah, you can pan around and just have a look at, yeah, the change that's occurred between the two data captures. So try to keep it quite clear, as green is growth, red is loss. So you can see all the trees that were taken down during the RA being demolished. And then you can also see the little bits of growth that have happened on trees in the subsequent years between captures. But yeah, just to summarise, so this was quite, I'd say, unique to South Australia. It's the first time South Australia that remote sensing was used to build an evidence base across the entire metropolitan area at one time in one study. So this data is going to be pretty crucial to building community capacity to help create that greener and more climate resilient Adelaide. And that data is telling us who's being impacted by urban heat and where it is and what's causing it. And yeah, this evidence is going to be used to prioritise urban investment. So once we've got the green prioritisation analysis run again, and yeah, it'll help us direct that investment where it's most needed, so that everyone will hopefully have equitable access to green spaces. That's it.
Let me just turn mute off. Thank you, Sarah. That was great. We do have quite a few people in the Q&A function who have given us some of their thoughts. Oh, you've got reactions popping up, lots of hand claps and love hearts. That's great. Thank you. Really amazing information there. So I'm going to go through some of these questions that are in the Q&A function, and I'll remind you, everyone, we are using Q&A, not chat. So if you could do that, that would be great. It just helps us keep everything in one spot. So quite a few of the questions are around access to the data, and if you can be specific on one particular spot when you do a data download, and also if the shape files are available to council so that they can help plan for growth.
Yep, so The data is available to download from data.sa. So I guess we'll share those links in the chat or in the email afterwards. So that's just the whole data set in terms of actually getting a specific area. I guess get in touch and we'll organise a specific area if that's something that you need. So yeah, it's available to view through the viewer, as I mentioned.
Yep.
So yeah, we'll again provide that link. So is that about the data or is that about the prioritisation analysis data that will be run again next year? So we'll be in touch with stakeholders just to work out how best to share that information as well, whether that's a viewer or sharing the data itself. That'll be something that we'll go through in consultation with stakeholders.
Yeah, great. And we do have a question about the specifics of the data. I'm just trying to make it a little bit bigger. So there's a question from Daniel Marotti. He says, regarding the 2022 data, which was collected in one go, how long did it take to collect the entire data? Was it over a few hours? And then was it calibrated to compensate for the natural changes in air and surface temperature that occur throughout the day? And I guess how did you do that?
Yeah. So I might stop sharing. So there was the different data sets. So the multispectral imagery was satellite imagery that was captured in one go. The LiDAR was captured over how many days? It was in a single week, the LiDAR capture. The thermal imagery, unfortunately, was a difficult proposition. I don't know if anyone remembers what summer in 2022 was like. We had a La Nina year. I think it was the third successive La Nina year. It was unfortunately quite cool and overcast and quite rainy. So not great conditions to capture urban heat. So we were able to capture 80% of the urban area between January and probably early April. And then unfortunately we had to come back and capture the last 20%, which was on Kaparinga the following January. So what they do with the urban heat is that it's averaged to that day. So as you imagine, as the plane's flying over, its temperature and weather conditions are changing all the time. So it's basically averaged to that entire capture. So that scale of cool to hot, it's basically relevant to that day.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, it makes it a challenge when when the environment isn't working with you.
Yes.
We have now, Sarah, did you answer that question about the greening prioritization analysis, if that's available?
So the I'll have to look into it. I can't remember if the 2021 I think has been shared with some project partners, but I think because as I mentioned, the data sets were captured over a 3-year project, a 3-year span over different projects. So it hasn't been widely used because the data was captured under different conditions. So in some areas it works really well, in other areas it doesn't work very well at all. So it hasn't been widely used or shared, but we will be rerunning it beginning of next year for the 2022 data. So that will be applied across the whole region. So it might be worth waiting until we get that and then we will share that.
Great, thank you. Are activity fact sheets available? Oh, no, sorry. Natalie Elio is saying that activity fact sheets for the tool are also available on the Resilient East website.
Yes.
Did you know about that one, Sarah? Yeah, great.
Yeah. They were, as I said, we built on a lot of the expertise from Resilient East and Beck Taylor. I don't know if she's here, but yeah, a lot of that stuff from Beck Taylor was, our first protocol in terms of helping us develop not just the data sets themselves, but a lot of the communications products. Yeah, Beck was vital to a lot of that.
And I can see that Nat has been helping us in the background, giving us some links as well to the interactive map. So
Thanks,
feel
Nat.
free to hop in the Q&A to see some of those links there. We've got a couple of questions about trees, and one question in particular is what really is the key reasons for losing trees. And I know that you showed that comparison of between when developments come through and the trees that were there versus the trees that no longer are. Do you know of any other reasons that trees are being lost?
So there's a few different reasons. It's not just about developments. There's been a few areas, upgrades to roadside trees. You can see there's been a few losses. There's been a few areas, just trying to think some of the big areas of loss. There was a road development, I think it was Port Adelaide. There was a linear park along Port Adelaide. They put in a wetland, so a lot of trees went then. I think there was a road widening project somewhere in the eastern suburbs. A lot of trees were lost then. So there's multiple reasons for trees being lost. Yeah, sometimes it's development, sometimes it's just you can see people have just taken down a tree. It's quite depressing when you look around. Sometimes you can see there's these lovely big trees and then the next imagery is gone. So yeah, I think there's a few different reasons for it.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it's one of those wicked challenges where there's lots of different things to tackle to resolve the problem. We've got a question about targets. And the question says, the City of Onkaparinga 2045 target for UCC, so urban canopy cover target, is only 15% and has been since 2019. Planning staff have been saying that this is an appropriate future target, and that other councils have confirmed 15% as their in the last few months, the council have confirmed 15% as their 2045 target. Other councils have less than 20% 2045 targets. And so I guess it's a question for Green Adelaide to set a more appropriate 2045 target above 30% as soon as possible. And, you know, I guess that will have an impact on what those developments look like and all the regulatory processes that we have to make that happen.
Yeah.
Do you have any background on that?
I know it's a work in progress for the urban greening strategy to define those targets. And I think where we're at the moment is that there's no one size fits all target that works for everywhere. You've got lots of different land use types and land ownership types. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of different environment types that, and those questions around, is it reasonable to set a target for a coastal area that you'd be setting for the hill space zone? So there's a lot of those questions that Ali in her work with the urban greening strategy has to answer hopefully in the next few months, I guess, but that's something to work through with partners, because there is no one size fits all bill, and there's also the challenge of, do you make that big aspirational 40% canopy target and then have people think, no, that's not achievable, we're not even going to bother? So trying to set that reasonable, realistic target, that's a big challenge for everyone, I think.
Yeah, agreed. And Ethan in the Q&A, he's kind of linked in with this question about trying to get tall trees so that they can provide that canopy cover as well, and whether that is actually, you know, the difficulty of providing tall trees is coming out as a result of planting guidelines, which might be focusing on other maybe more shrubby bushes. But I think like the biodiversity element is still really important. So how do you, I guess that's that balance again, like you were mentioning about having trees that provide a canopy function without losing out on all of the other layers of important vegetation.
And it's recognizing that the urban space is highly contested. You've got above and below ground infrastructure that has to be somewhere. It's that challenge of what comes first. Like, hopefully trees will start being more prioritized above grey infrastructure, but then how does that work in a realistic sense, I guess? So yeah, this is hopefully a good data set to actually help guide those conversations and decisions.
Yeah, and I think just rereading Ethan's comment as well, it is about if large trees are removed, particularly along rail corridors where there are height limits for trees, those trees can't go back in. So we are
Yeah.
consistently losing out on precious canopy without.
And it's not just the canopy, it's that biodiversity aspect as well. Like it's the hollows, it's the it's the animals that require that or need that service
Yeah.
as well. So yeah, trying to find that balance is it's going to be a difficult one.
Yeah, agreed. There's a question about native grass species instead of the usual, perhaps exotic grasses for use in verges. Do you know of any of them that might be a bit more drought resilient?
Not any specific species, but and that is a challenge with this data set. I didn't touch on it that much, but unfortunately, like native national parks, native reserves where they haven't been irrigated, they come up as quite a hot spot. Um, so it's just a natural part of the natural environment that grasses will die off in summer. So those areas come up quite hot. So yeah, that's the challenge as well from this data that it doesn't necessarily direct what happens. I guess it's sort of these are sort of we can identify areas that need greening, but not really direct what goes in. But yeah, agreed that native plants and native grasses, anything that's drought tolerant, would be very much preferred, I think.
Yeah, and maybe it comes down to that, the context of where these things are being included into our landscapes and making sure that they're in the right place,
Yeah.
doing what we want them to do. All of those thinkings around that. We have a question about how are we promoting the benefits of having trees over the fears regarding dropping limbs and bushfires, which I think is it's an ongoing wicked question about
It is.
the fear of nature in our cities.
Yeah. And I think the best answer I've ever heard to that is to look at urban trees and urban vegetation as an appreciating asset. And like any other asset, it needs to be actively managed. So it's not just about stick the tree in the ground and assume that it's going to be there and healthy forever. You still have to manage it. You still have to make sure that it's healthy. You have to have arboriculturalists there to actually make sure that it's healthy and safe. So yeah, it's like any asset, you have to manage it.
We have a question about if there's been any collaboration with SA Health and community health services or primary care NGOs, because they can help with the prevalence of chronic illness and strengthen the case to increase local canopy targets, a minimum perhaps of 25 to 30%, and also focus on environmental justice for those communities. What a
Yeah,
great idea.
so Wellbeing SA, who are now Preventive Health SA, were one of our major partners. They contributed financially and contributed their expertise in this as well. So yeah, they've had access to the data, and it's going to be informing a lot of their strategies as well. I did collaborate with one of their researchers on a bit of a research project into looking at where heat waves are affecting illness and lives lost, and just the overlaps between their research and what we've got is there's a lot of parallels there. So they've been using that in their information.
Right.
And I know there's a lot of their epidemiologists are looking to use this data and their further research as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of overlap, like you said. And I think health. So the Heart Foundation has been for a long time advocating for more walkable places because they see the health benefits, and then that directly links in with making these places more environmentally friendly to walk in, and that means cool and shady and aesthetically pleasing. So yeah, all of those overlaps. A quick question from Elise about how many officers worked on the body of work.
Oh, good question. So from Green Adelaide, there was, God, I have to think now. 4 of us in Green Adelaide, and then 2 people up in DW, and then I have close to 100 people coming to our stakeholder meetings, so across all our partnership organisations and councils. So so probably a core group of about 6 of us, and then all that contribution from our partners as well, which was very valuable.
Always a team effort.
Yes.
So I'm just going through the Q&A. So Natalie's put more prompts to more resources, which is great. And John has even put what is an example of what's possible in a suburban block in there as a link, which is fabulous.
Oh,
Thank you for
thanks.
sharing that. I'm just checking the chat function. There's some chat about native grasses and developments leaving little room for trees, which is an ongoing problem. I think we have to have greening and to have trees, we first need to plan for the space for them. So I guess that's a little shout out if you're designing a new house, that you've got to make sure you have room for your tree tenant as well.
And that's been work that Ali Collins in Green Adelaide's been doing with the urban greening strategy and Green Garden Guide, I think it's called. So just a few guidelines around planning and housing planning.
I think that is it. One last little check of the Q&A because there's a new post. John has asked if there's a reference to the roof colour comparison. So we will go through these Q&A questions. If there's a request for a reference or something, we'll follow that up in a follow-up email. But is that something that you have a reference to?
I'd have to see if I can find it. Like my comment about how much it costs having a dark roof. It was I think it was an article on the ABC News website a few months ago. I'll have to see if I can find it. But yeah, there was an attempt to actually quantify how much it costs you in extra energy per year to have a dark roof.
You've got to have that information at all those different levels so that people who are thinking about the financial issue, we're meeting them with the information that hooks them in as well. So that's important. And Matt has included some information about the eucalypt widowmaker, which I think is a term used for trees that drop limbs or presumed to drop limbs. So we'll have a look at that as well. Thank you everyone who put in topics and information. It is almost 5. You've done a great job, Sarah, of keeping to time. Well done. And if there was nothing additional, I'm just checking chat again. Sorry, it's great video of me just checking chat and Q&A. But I'd like to take this opportunity now sort of to wrap up a little bit and to thank you all who've joined us and Sarah for watching live. And to those who might be watching this later on, the beauty of the internet is that we will be able to share this with more people. So it is a bit more accessible having that recording. From here, like we mentioned, we will send a follow-up email. We'll have references and some of that extra information in there as well. Anything that we haven't included in our comments, we'll follow up with the chat and the Q&A function. And we will be wrapping this series up for this year. We'll send a short evaluation survey out, and this will help guide whether we run this series again, this seminar series, and whether if we do it next year. If so, if you're keen for another seminar series, what topics would you be interested in? And I think that's always fun to think a bit out of the box about what we might be providing more information on. Perhaps some of these questions in the Q&A might guide us as well about how we reach out to people and who we're trying to bring along on this journey of trying to get more urban greening. So thank you again, everyone, for coming along. Everyone from Green Adelaide here, we hope that this series has helped to inspire you and support you in your work that you're doing to keep and make Adelaide a cooler, greener, wilder place and a more climate resilient city. And just like to thank you again, and hopefully we'll see you maybe next year with some new topics. Thank you, Sarah, so much.
Thanks, Reb. Thanks, everyone.